and thanks for tuning into this lesson, which is an introduction in how to use diminished 7th arpeggios in a blues solo. But before we start to look at the arpeggios, let's take a look at where we can use them within a standard 12-bar blues. Well, diminished 7th arpeggios have quite a tense sound to them, so ideally they need to be used where the tension they create can then be released. And one of the best places where we can create tension and then release it is where a 5 chord resolves to a 1 chord. And if you're not sure what that means, there's a link in the comments section below where you can download a free PDF which has an explanation, and it also contains all the on-screen graphics shown in this lesson. So for this lesson we'll be using this chord sequence, which is a standard 12-bar blues in A, and there are 2 places where a 5 chord resolves to a 1 chord, and the first one is in bars 4 and 5. Bar 4 is an A7 chord which changes to a D7 in bar 5, so there we have a 5 chord, the A7, resolving to the 1 chord, the D7. So a good place to create some tension with a diminished 7 arpeggio is in bar 4, because that tension will then be released when the chord changes to D7 in bar 5. And whenever I play a diminished 7 arpeggio over a 5 chord, I always try and target a strong chord tone when the chord changes to the 1 to really reinforce the release of the tension created by the diminished 7 arpeggio. So for example, over the A7 I might play an A diminished 7 arpeggio, but then I'll land on an F sharp note when the chord changes to D7, because F sharp is the major third of D7 and is therefore a strong chord tone. And here's an example of that. And the second place where a 5 chord resolves to a 1 chord is right at the end of the sequence in bar 12, where the E7 changes to the A7 at the start of the next 12-bar sequence. So this means we can also create some tension with a diminished 7 arpeggio in bar 12, because the tension will then be released when the chord changes to A7. Okay, so we know that we can use diminished 7 arpeggios in bars 4 and 12 of a standard blues. So now let's look at how to play the arpeggios. And as this is an introductory lesson, we'll just focus on 2 fingering patterns which only use the top 4 strings. So over the A7 chord in bar 4, we can use an A diminished 7 arpeggio. And for this introductory lesson, we'll be using this shape or fingering pattern. A at the 7th fret of the D string, C at the 5th fret of the G string, E flat at the 8th fret of the G string, F sharp at the 7th fret of the B string, A at the 5th fret of the E string, and C at the 8th fret of the E string. Okay, so in this first example, over the A7 chord in bar 4, I'll play the A diminished 7 arpeggio ascending and then descending, and I want to make sure the tension is resolved when the chord changes to D7, so I'll end the lick on F sharp at the 4th fret of the D string. So that sounds okay, but this time, instead of simply playing the notes of the arpeggio ascending and then descending, I'll play them in a sequence which starts on C at the 8th fret of the E string and then descends 4 notes. Then we do the same thing again starting on A, and then the same thing again starting on F sharp. So we get this cascading effect. And just like in the last example, I'll finish the lick on the F sharp at the 4th fret of the D string, which is the major third of the D7 chord. And here's how that lick sounds in context. Okay, so there's another diminished 7th arpeggio I sometimes like to use, and this one creates a different kind of tension over the A7 chord. So here are the notes of an A7 arpeggio: A, C sharp, E, and G. And if I move the A up a semitone to B flat and leave all the other notes unchanged, we now have a B flat diminished 7 arpeggio. But because 3 of the notes are from an A7 chord, we could just think of it as adding a B flat note to an A7 chord, and that gives us an A7 flat 9. So by playing a diminished 7 arpeggio a semitone up from the root of the A7 chord, we're basically spelling out an A7 flat 9 chord. And here's an example of how it sounds in context over the A7 chord. And just like in the previous examples, I'll land on an F sharp note where the chord then changes to D7. Okay, so I'll now improvise over the whole 12-bar sequence, and I'll use both of the diminished 7 arpeggios covered in this lesson. Over the A7 chord in bar 4, I'll use an A diminished 7 arpeggio, and over the E7 chord in bar 12, I'll use the diminished 7 arpeggio a semitone up from the root of the chord, and the chord is E7, so therefore I'll use an F diminished 7 arpeggio. And in both cases, after I've played the arpeggio, I'll land on a strong chord tone to help resolve the tension created by the arpeggio. So as this lesson is an introduction to using diminished 7 arpeggios, I've deliberately just focused on 2 fingering patterns on the top 4 strings. But even with just those 2 patterns, we can still add some spice to our blues solos. Okay, so I really hope you found this lesson useful, and if you have, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.